When God elevates someone quietly, the world doesn't notice at first, but the enemies feel it in their bones long before anyone else does. Before you even realized it, something in your energy shifted, and let me tell you, it wasn't subtle. You didn't roar, you didn't announce anything, you didn't even change your routine. Yet suddenly, people who once hovered around you like flies on free food started disappearing like they heard a spiritual alarm only meant for them. And that's the part that gets interesting, because science even confirms this. Humans can sense a threat before they can logically identify it. It's called neuroception, the way the nervous system detects danger without conscious awareness. Your haters don't need evidence, don't need proof, don't need a reason. Their spirit registered something about you before their mind knew what to call it. And whatever it was, it made them sprint. You didn't shout, you didn't scheme, you didn't even clap back. You simply evolved. And evolution is the one thing your enemies never prepared for. See, the funny thing is, you've been focused on growing, healing, and just minding your business like a normal adult trying to survive bills, responsibilities, and the occasional person who still can't spell your name correctly. Meanwhile, the people who underestimated you are now acting like you suddenly turned into a supernatural plot twist. The same ones who used to gossip boldly are now avoiding eye contact like you owe them money. But here's the truth they're running from. Your growth exposed their stagnation. Your clarity disrupted their confusion. Your inner shift made their outer behavior look childish. They don't know what to call this version of you, but they know one thing for sure: they can't handle it. So now, as we dive into this message, understand this. You didn't become too much. They just remained too little for too long, and once the mirror flipped, they couldn't stand the reflection. Let's get into it. This is going to make everything suddenly make sense. Number 1, you're dangerous because you don't need a crowd to confirm your identity. One of the most unsettling things about you is how you discovered who you are without needing anyone to clap for you. Most people build their confidence on approval. They need someone to tell them they're worthy, talented, or important before they start believing it. But you found your identity in quiet seasons where nobody was watching, nobody was helping, and nobody was cheering. You learned to stand on your own voice when everyone else expected you to crumble. That's why people are uncomfortable with you now. When someone's identity is self-built instead of crowd-fed, they become unpredictable. You don't operate on external validation, so you can't be controlled by it. People realize that they can't influence you by withholding support, affection, or recognition, and that alone makes you a threat to anyone who relies on manipulation. It's the independence they fear, not financial independence, not physical independence, but identity independence, the ability to know who you are even when no one agrees. You grew into someone who isn't desperate for a seat at someone's table because you already accepted that you can build your own. And that means no one can use access as leverage against you anymore. This inner strength didn't come from arrogance. It came from surviving environments where you had to choose yourself repeatedly just to stay sane. You weren't handed confidence, you forged it. And people who never did that work don't understand how you walk with such certainty. To them, confidence without approval looks rebellious. Without their validation, it looks like you're ignoring them. But in reality, you simply stopped needing their confirmation to function. Your enemies ran because they realized you can't be destabilized by their silence or empowered by their attention. You don't rise because they like you, and you don't fall because they don't. In their world, power comes from influence. In your world, power comes from identity. And that's a type of strength they will never know how to challenge, only how to avoid. Number 2, your haters run because you're no longer playing on their psychological chessboard. What makes you dangerous to people who once tried to control you isn't a loud confrontation or a dramatic display of power. It's the fact that you stopped reacting to their moves. You don't play the game they set up anymore, and that's terrifying to someone who relied on manipulating your emotions to feel bigger than themselves. For years, they tested boundaries, dropped little jabs, and watched how you would twist, turn, or defend yourself. That was their comfort zone. They knew how to predict you, how to get under your skin, and how to use your reactions to their advantage. Now, suddenly, that script is gone. You've stopped taking the bait. You've stopped giving them openings to feel important or victorious. And the thing they can't handle is that you didn't have to react to win. Every time they tried to provoke, you stayed calm. Every time they whispered lies, you didn't feel the need to shout your truth, your silence, your detachment, your refusal to engage on their level. That's the exact power move they never saw coming. They run not because you hurt them, but because they realize they no longer have influence over you. Influence was their currency, and without it, they are powerless. You've turned their own tools against them by simply refusing to be used. The energy they invested in scheming, in watching, in attempting to manipulate, is now wasted. And wasted energy is painful for people who survive off control. When you stop playing by their rules, the entire foundation they relied on to feel dominant collapses. You don't need to fight, you just exist, aligned with your purpose, unmoved by their chaos. And that's why they retreat. They can't cope with someone who is no longer readable, someone who is no longer predictable, someone who has taken the power they thought they had and quietly removed it. They're not running away from you. They're running from the realization that they can't touch the person you've become. That truth terrifies them more than any confrontation ever could. Number 3, you're dangerous because you saw their true selves before they saw yours. You became dangerous the moment you learned to read people with precision, even before they revealed themselves. While they were busy crafting masks, rehearsing lies, and performing facades, you were quietly observing, noticing the cracks in their stories, and understanding the intentions behind their smiles. You recognized patterns in behavior that most people miss, moments when their kindness was conditional or their generosity had strings attached. By the time they thought they had revealed themselves to you, you had already seen through the illusion, and that awareness made you untouchable. That's why they panic now. People rely on the element of surprise when it comes to manipulation. They expect their moves to be invisible, their deceit to go unnoticed, their gossip to land. But you saw everything coming. You didn't react in anger or desperation. You simply catalogued it, understood it, and let it fuel your own growth. They underestimated the quiet observer, the person who gathers information like armor. And once they realized you weren't playing the same game they were, fear set in. Your awareness makes you unpredictable. They no longer know which version of you they will face because they assume you are reacting to them, when in reality you're steps ahead, anticipating their next attempt and choosing how or if you'll respond. Their strategies, once effective, now crumble because you aren't baited by illusion or distracted by deception. You didn't expose them publicly or retaliate violently. You simply became someone who cannot be fooled, someone who cannot be controlled, someone whose clarity is so precise that it forces truth out of even the most skilled pretenders. That insight alone terrifies them because it removes every advantage they ever thought they had over you. The fact is, people run from the eyes that see through their act before they ever finish performing it. You don't even have to say a word. Your understanding of them is enough to make them retreat, and that is where your danger lies, in the quiet certainty that you always knew what was real long before they had the courage to see themselves. Number 4, your presence exposes their weaknesses without you opening your mouth. Your presence alone is unsettling to the people who mistreated you, because it acts like a mirror they never asked to look into. You don't accuse them, confront them, or preach at them. Yet something about you makes their own behavior echo back at them with uncomfortable clarity. It's not that you're trying to expose them, it's that your growth, your strength, and your authenticity make it impossible for them to hide behind the excuses they once used to justify how they treated you. When someone knows they did wrong, they expect you to be bitter or broken. But when you show up healed, grounded, and unbothered, it reveals how unnecessary their cruelty was. You're living proof that they never had the power they thought they had over you, and that truth stings. It forces them to confront the fact that their actions came from insecurity, jealousy, or fear, not from anything you actually did. They are left wrestling with the reality that the person they tried to break turned out stronger, and that's the type of guilt people run from. Being in your presence makes them feel exposed because you don't have to say a word for them to remember the lies they spread, the manipulation they attempted, or the disrespect they thought you'd never notice. They feel judged without you judging them. They feel guilty without you condemning them. They feel small because they suddenly see how big your character always was. Your growth highlights their lack of growth. Your maturity makes their behavior look childish. Your stability makes their chaos impossible to deny. This is why they retreat, not because you're holding anything over their head, but because being around you makes their own conscience louder. The parts of themselves they've been avoiding, the envy, the dishonesty, the insecurity, come rushing to the surface the moment you walk in the room. They can't hide it, and they can't mask it, because your energy leaves no space for pretense. You don't expose them by speaking, you expose them by being. And for people who have spent their whole lives avoiding accountability, that alone is enough reason to run. Number 5. You've mastered the art of outgrowing people without announcing it. One of the most powerful moves you've made is outgrowing people quietly, without fanfare, without explanations, without validation. Most people announce their upgrades, post about their achievements, or try to drag everyone along to prove they've made it. You didn't need to do any of that. You simply evolved. You worked on yourself, raised your standards, and shifted your energy, and suddenly the people who used to occupy your space felt a gap they couldn't cross. They realized the dynamic had changed, not because you told them, but because your presence now operates on a level they cannot reach. This is why they run. It's not about jealousy, at least not in the shallow sense. It's about realization. They feel the distance and know instinctively that you will never shrink to fit their limitations again. You stopped bending to meet their expectations, stopped lowering your standards to soothe their insecurities, and stopped validating the roles they thought they had in your life. You outgrew the people who could not rise alongside you, and that is terrifying to someone who thrived on holding others down to feel secure. Your elevation didn't require confrontation or dramatic exits. It required patience, discipline, and faith in yourself. You outgrew them in silence, in subtle shifts of behavior, in decisions that prioritized your growth over their approval. They didn't notice the moment it happened, but they felt its effect immediately. Your confidence, your clarity, and your calm dominance made them confront the truth they've been avoiding. They cannot influence you anymore. And here's the thing that terrifies them most. You're not looking back. You're not waiting for them to catch up. You are fully aware of your worth and operate from it. Your growth doesn't beg for recognition. It simply exists. And when someone who thrived on your limitations realizes you are untouchable by their manipulations, the only choice they see is to retreat. They run because your outgrowth is permanent, unshakable, and untouchable. And they know deep down that you will never shrink to meet them where they are again. Number 6, you're dangerous because you don't beg for clarification or closure. What unsettles people the most about you is your ability to walk away without demanding explanations, apologies, or emotional cleanup. Most people need closure to feel secure. They need a conversation, a reason, or a confession just to move on. But you learned that clarity doesn't always come from others. It often comes from observation and truth. Once someone's character becomes clear to you, that's all the closure you need. And this is exactly where your power terrifies them. People who thrive on manipulation rely heavily on you needing answers. They expect you to chase after explanations, to beg for honesty, to press for understanding. That gives them control. It gives them time. It keeps them relevant in your life. But when you stopped seeking justification for their behavior, they lost the ability to guide your emotions. You detached, and detachment is the one thing they never prepared for. Your silence isn't passive, it's decisive. It means you've collected enough evidence from their actions to understand who they are, and you no longer need them to explain anything. They can't lure you back into cycles of confusion. They can't guilt-trip you into returning. They can't keep you in emotional limbo. You've mastered the ability to let people reveal themselves and then simply adjust your distance accordingly. This makes you unpredictable in a world where most people's choices can be manipulated by emotional strings. When you stop chasing answers, you stop being predictable. When you stop being predictable, you stop being controllable. And when you stop being controllable, you become dangerous to those who once fed off your confusion. They're not running because you confronted them. They're running because you left without needing anything from them. And that level of emotional independence exposes their entire strategy. They know there is nothing left for them to use against you, no explanation to withhold, no apology to dangle, no closure to weaponize. Your ability to move forward without needing their words is exactly what makes them panic. It means their power over you was always imagined, and now they're forced to face that truth while you continue rising without hesitation. Number 7, they run. Because you refuse to carry the weight of their humanity anymore. There was a time when you carried emotions that never belonged to you. You carried the tension in people who couldn't communicate honestly. You carried the blame for situations they created. You carried the insecurities they projected onto you because they didn't want to face their own shortcomings. You became the emotional sponge for people who didn't have the courage to acknowledge their own flaws. And for a while, you did it quietly, thinking it was kindness, thinking it was peacekeeping, thinking it was your responsibility to keep harmony. But something shifted. You learned that carrying someone else's emotional mess doesn't make you strong. It makes you unavailable to your own growth. And once that realization hit, you returned all that weight back to the people it came from. You stopped accepting responsibilities that weren't yours. You stopped letting people throw their guilt, insecurities, and frustrations onto you like you were a dumping ground. You stepped out of the role they assigned you, and that's where everything changed. When someone has been using you to avoid themselves, the moment you stop absorbing their emotional chaos becomes the moment they're confronted with who they truly are. And most people aren't ready for that level of honesty. They preferred you carrying their burdens because it allowed them to pretend those burdens didn't exist. But when you withdrew, they had no choice but to face the reflection they've been running from. The insecurity, the bitterness, the fear, the lack of accountability. That's why they distance themselves now. It's not because you became cold or harsh. It's because being around you requires authenticity, and they aren't ready to be that honest with themselves. Your new boundaries expose what they've been hiding, even from themselves. You stopped cushioning the impact of their actions, and without that buffer, their true nature shows up loudly. You're not judging them. You're just refusing to carry what isn't yours anymore. That alone forces them to deal with the parts of themselves they kept buried. And for people who have made denial their lifestyle, that kind of truth is unbearable. So they run, not from you, but from the weight of their own humanity finally returning to their hands. Number 8, you're dangerous Because you turn every attack into a skill set. The people who tried to hurt you never expected their attacks to become the very tools that would strengthen you. They thought their betrayal would break you, their gossip would silence you, and their rejection would weaken you. Instead, every blow they delivered became a lesson you mastered. Every disappointment became a blueprint for how to move differently. Every time they underestimated you, they unknowingly upgraded you. They weren't training you on purpose, but life used them as unwilling instructors. The truth is, you didn't grow despite the pain. You grew through it. The lies they told sharpened your discernment. You learned how to read motives, not words. You became skilled at sensing tension beneath politeness, manipulation hidden inside favors, and jealousy masked as jokes. That kind of awareness can't be taught in peace. It's crafted in conflict. And now you walk with a level of insight that makes it nearly impossible for anyone to deceive you the way they once did. The losses they celebrated also strengthened you in ways they never imagined. Instead of collapsing, you built resilience. Instead of shrinking, you expanded. You developed emotional muscles people didn't even know you had. You learned how to rebuild from scratch, how to stay grounded when everything around you shifted, and how to rely on yourself when the world offered no support. They thought they were taking something from you, but all they did was clear space for your evolution. That's why they're uncomfortable now. They see a version of you they didn't intend to create. Your strength exposes their weakness. Your wisdom exposes their foolishness. Your resilience exposes the fact that their attacks had the opposite effect. And deep down, they know they played a role in building the person standing before them now. Someone they can no longer manipulate, guilt-trip, or intimidate. Your growth is their unintended punishment. They wanted to wound you. Instead, they woke up a version of you they were never prepared to face. And that's the part that keeps them running. The realization that every attempt to break you only made you sharper, wiser, and harder to touch. Number 9. You don't fight people. You outlast their strategies. Your power isn't loud or explosive. It's relentless and quiet. While others are busy trying to provoke reactions, manipulate outcomes, and pull you into their drama, you operate on a completely different level. You don't engage in chaos or seek revenge because you've learned that reacting emotionally is exactly what they want. The more you respond to their schemes, the more they feel alive, powerful, and in control. But you don't give them that satisfaction. You simply keep moving forward, letting time and your focus do the work for you. That's what makes you dangerous. People who rely on manipulation and strategy thrive when their targets can be baited into overreaction. They craft lies, rumors, and traps hoping to destabilize you. They measure their success by your flinch, your argument, your emotional collapse. But you've mastered the art of outlasting. You don't let their behavior dictate your rhythm. You don't expend energy proving them wrong or defending your space unnecessarily. You simply live in your lane, and your consistency becomes a mirror that exposes them. Eventually, their strategies collapse under their own weight. Lies unravel. Manipulations fail. Plans that depended on your participation crumble because you refused to participate. You understand that the strongest weapon against toxicity isn't confrontation, it's endurance. You let them expose themselves without interference, and the truth always comes out when someone is allowed to run unchecked by your reactions. People run from someone who can't be baited into self-destruction because they can't predict your moves anymore. They counted on chaos, but you operate from clarity. They counted on vulnerability, but you operate from self-mastery. The very thing they used to feel dominant against you, your reactions, is gone. That absence of predictable drama terrifies them because it removes the control they've always relied on. You don't fight because you don't need to. You simply outlast. And when they realize their strategies no longer work, the only choice left for them is to retreat, proving that your patience and focus are far more dangerous than any impulsive retaliation ever could be. Number 10. They fear you because you walk in truth, while they survive on illusions. People who build their identity on lies, gossip, and carefully curated performances cannot stand someone whose life is rooted in authenticity. Your truth disrupts everything they rely on. You don't shift your personality depending on who's watching. You don't perform kindness for clout. You don't pretend to be humble while secretly stirring drama. You show up as the same person in private, in public, and in silence. And that consistency makes the people who operate in shadows extremely uncomfortable. Your transparency complicates their lives because they thrive in environments where confusion gives them power. They create misleading stories, twist facts, and rely on blurred lines to remain relevant. So when someone comes along who is straightforward, honest, and unapologetically real, their entire strategy collapses. Your presence alone makes their lies harder to maintain. Suddenly, the narratives they tried to spread about you don't match the reality people see with their own eyes. And the more authentic you become, the more their illusions crack. They fear you because they can't twist your character. You live too plainly for their rumors to stick. You operate too sincerely for their accusations to gain traction. You're too grounded for their distortions to seem believable. And that terrifies them. When someone's reputation is built on exaggerations and false identities, being around a person who is genuine exposes their entire structure. This is why they run. You don't need to defend yourself to ruin their lies. Your truth does it for you. You don't need to clap back or argue because your daily behavior proves them wrong. You don't need a crowd to validate you because your character stands firm on its own. And nothing shakes a liar more than realizing their words can't overpower your reality. They survive on illusions because illusions give them control. Your truth takes that control away. It forces people to see them clearly instead of through the stories they created. And once their masks start slipping, they can't stand being anywhere near the person who unintentionally exposes them by simply being authentic. Your truth is stable. Their illusions are fragile. That's why they fear you, and why they keep their distance. Number 11. You already forgave them, and that's what frightens them most. The thing that unsettles people who hurt you the most isn't that you're succeeding or that you've moved on. It's that you've already forgiven them. And this isn't a shallow, surface-level forgiveness. It's the kind that cuts off every strand of control they thought they had over you. Forgiveness doesn't mean you've invited them back into your life or that you've forgotten the harm they caused. It means you've returned the power they tried to wield over your emotions. You no longer feed their sense of importance with anger, resentment, or attention. You removed their leverage entirely. For someone who relied on your pain for their sense of power, this is terrifying. They expected guilt, bitterness, or obsession. They expected you to stew, to react, to replay every slight in your mind. But when you let it go completely, when you neutralized their emotional weapon, you became unpredictable in a way they weren't prepared for. They can no longer manipulate your feelings because your feelings are yours, unclaimed by them, unmoved by them, and unbothered by their presence. Nothing scares a hater more than realizing that the person they attacked feels nothing toward them. Your calm indifference, born from true forgiveness, becomes a reflection of their own weakness. Every insult, every betrayal, every attempt to provoke you loses meaning because you refuse to feed it. You don't need revenge. You don't need acknowledgement. You just exist in a state of peace they cannot penetrate. Forgiveness is power. And your power comes from detachment, clarity, and the refusal to let anyone else dictate your inner state. By forgiving, you've stripped them of their influence and left them exposed, looking for a reaction that will never come. You don't need to confront them to win. You don't need to speak to prove yourself. They fear you because the weapon they thought they had, your anger, your pain, your obsession, is gone. And once they realize it, the only move left for them is to retreat, leaving you stronger, lighter, and untouchable. Number 12. You're dangerous. Because your progress doesn't require their permission or participation. What truly intimidates people about you isn't your talent, your intelligence, or your resilience. It's the fact that none of your progress is dependent on them. They spent years trying to position themselves as the gatekeepers to your next level, the ones you'd have to impress, appease, or wait for before you could advance. They wanted to be the middlemen of your destiny, the filters you had to pass through, the validators you had to seek. But here's where everything shifted. God showed you paths they never even knew existed, hidden access points, unconventional routes, spiritual corridors that can't be blocked, sabotaged, or controlled by human hands. Suddenly you were moving, quietly, quickly, and without consulting the people who believed they owned the keys to your future. That's what makes you dangerous. Not reckless, not harmful, but untouchably independent. Your destiny doesn't pause because someone refuses to support you. Your purpose doesn't shrink because someone with an inflated ego thinks you owe them something. You rise because elevation is built into your soul's assignment, not because someone approved your application. And the moment they realized you don't need their network, their name, their favor, or their presence, panic set in. They're watching you advance down roads they can't follow, doors open for you that don't even appear for them. Opportunities find you without you begging, bending, or betraying yourself. You're moving forward with a momentum they can't slow down because it isn't sourced from them, it's sourced from God. And anything God fuels cannot be intercepted. They wanted to block your path, not realizing you were never walking through their path to begin with. They wanted to be necessary to your progression, not understanding you were designed to be unstoppable, even if no one supported you. Your independence terrifies them because it reveals a truth they've avoided. Your destiny was never in their hands, but your absence exposes how little power they actually had. You don't wait for permission, you don't beg for participation, you move, and the world moves with you. Number 13. They run because you no longer speak the language of insecurity. What unsettles people most about you isn't that you suddenly became louder, bolder, or more outspoken. It's that your confidence is no longer negotiable. You developed a kind of inner solidity that doesn't need applause, validation, or reassurance to stand tall. You aren't battling for attention or fighting for approval anymore, and that alone cuts off an entire communication channel they once depended on to control you. Insecure people thrive in environments where jealousy, competition, and subtle emotional manipulation are the norm. They understand how to operate in spaces where everyone is trying to prove something. They know how to navigate conversations that revolve around comparison. They feel powerful when they sense someone else shrinking, doubting, or over-explaining. That used to be the frequency they kept you on, and it worked as long as you needed something from them. But you outgrew that atmosphere completely. You started speaking through your alignment instead of your wounds. You make decisions based on your values, not your fears. You carry yourself with a calm conviction that doesn't rise or fall depending on who approves. To someone who depends on chaos to feel relevant, that kind of groundedness is suffocating. Your confidence exposes their instability without a single word. They feel it in the way you no longer justify yourself. They feel it in the way you no longer compete. They feel it in the way you simply exist without needing to diminish or elevate anyone else. And that's when they start to run. Not because you attacked them, but because the environment you now operate in requires honesty, humility, and authenticity, qualities insecurity cannot survive in. Around you, their masks malfunction. Their tactics fall flat. Their ego has nowhere to hide. Your presence forces them to either grow or go, and most people choose the path that doesn't require evolution. You stopped speaking their language, and without that shared insecurity to bond over, they have nothing left to hold on to. The moment you became aligned, they became exposed, and instead of rising to meet you, they chose to run from the kind of self-reflection they're not built for. Number 14. You're dangerous. Because peace is your superpower, not your weakness. People often mistake calmness for passivity, but in your case, peace is a form of leadership. It's not something you retreat into. It's something you command. Your peace isn't the kind that comes from ignoring problems or pretending everything is fine. It's the kind that comes from understanding your worth, your boundaries, and your connection to something bigger than the noise around you. That level of internal control is unsettling to people who depend on emotional turbulence to feel powerful. When others try to provoke you, they expect an eruption, some sort of emotional reaction that proves they still have access to your mind. But your stillness denies them that privilege. You don't rise to traps, you don't respond to every insult, and you don't collapse under pressure. You evaluate, you discern, and you move from clarity rather than impulse. That's a spiritual authority that can't be faked, and it can't be manipulated. This is why people who thrive on chaos run from you. They can't pull you into their emotional storms anymore. They can't shake your center or distract you with petty drama. When someone realizes their old tactics no longer work, the silent treatment, the guilt trips, the staged arguments, they panic. They depend on emotional instability to feel in control, and your peace destroys their entire strategy. Your calmness also reveals who they are, because without your reaction to hide behind, they're left standing next to their own behavior. They have nothing to deflect with, nothing to blame you for, nothing to twist or rewrite. Your composure forces a spotlight onto their chaos, and they can't handle how loud their dysfunction becomes when you're no longer participating in it. Your peace is powerful because it keeps you aligned with purpose and disconnected from destruction. It protects your energy, sharpens your intuition, and keeps your voice steady, even when everything around you is shaking. People run from that kind of stability because it reminds them of everything they haven't mastered within themselves. They can't influence you, and that loss of influence terrifies them. Conclusion. Everything you've seen here today isn't just a collection of truths. It's a reflection of the force you've quietly become. You've moved through life in ways most people cannot comprehend. You've mastered yourself when chaos surrounded you, grown when others tried to limit you, and elevated when people expected you to remain small. Every betrayal, every attempt to manipulate you, every lie spoken in your absence only sharpened your awareness and strengthened your character. You didn't just survive, you transformed. And that transformation is not just personal. It radiates outward, affecting the energy of everyone around you. You've become a presence that cannot be controlled, a mind that cannot be deceived, and a spirit that cannot be shaken. People run from you, not because you are loud or aggressive, but because you are untouchable in ways they've never seen before. You operate from truth, alignment, and clarity, leaving no space for manipulation, deceit, or ego-driven drama. Your growth, independence, and mastery of self are your silent power. And those who once tried to influence or harm you are now forced to confront the reality that you will never fit into their limited worldview again. Your journey proves that true power isn't about being feared or dominating others. It's about mastering yourself, turning attacks into lessons, and walking in a peace so strong that it unsettles even the most manipulative. You've done what most people only dream of. You've outlasted, outgrown, and outshined those who underestimated you, all while remaining aligned with your purpose. Your existence is now a mirror to those who can't stand the truth, and that alone is enough to make them retreat. So remember, your strength doesn't need validation. Your progress doesn't need permission. Your peace isn't weakness, and your truth is undeniable. You are walking proof that the universe rewards those who remain steadfast, authentic, and aligned, no matter what anyone else thinks or does. If this message resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss these powerful truths. Like this video to affirm your own growth, comment below, and share your experiences because your story matters, and share it with someone who needs to hear that their strength is already breaking barriers. This is more than inspiration. It's a blueprint for walking in the unstoppable power that's already within you. God bless you. Some people meet their awakening gently, but yours began with a funeral for a version of you they never knew existed. Before the world ever underestimated you, before anyone doubted you, before the first betrayal, the first heartbreak, the first spiritual attack, you had already died once. Not physically, but psychologically, spiritually, energetically. A part of you collapsed so completely that the veil separating the seen and unseen world didn't just lift, it tore. And once that fabric ripped open, nothing in your reality ever returned to its original shape. What they don't know, what they could never comprehend, is that your clarity didn't come from meditation apps, sage bundles, or YouTube's How to Awaken Your Third Eye tutorials. No. Your awakening came from an internal demolition so severe that even your shadow needed a recovery period. You didn't get wiser. You became reconstructed. You didn't get stronger. You became recalibrated. And the funny thing is, while they were busy misjudging you, you were literally going through a rebirth that would make any phoenix ask to borrow your notes. Psychologists have a term for this phenomenon: post-traumatic growth. It's a real, documented fact. Some people don't just survive adversity, their brain reorganizes itself into a higher, sharper, more perceptive version. See? Science accidentally confirmed your spiritual storyline without even realizing it. You didn't bounce back. You upgraded like someone pressed a hidden reset button inside your soul. And that's where this story begins. Because the truth is, you didn't become spiritually perceptive overnight. You didn't suddenly wake up seeing people's intentions without them saying a word. You didn't just evolve into someone who reads energy like subtitles on a movie. You became this version of yourself because life dragged you through a death most people never talk about. A death of illusions. A death of naivety. A death of the personality the world tried to glue onto you. They think you're mysterious, guarded, unpredictable. They have no idea you just don't operate on their level anymore. Your veil is gone. Your innocence expired. Your vision sharpened. And your spirit came back with receipts, archives, and a built-in lie detector so sensitive it might as well come with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So now you move differently. Not because you're paranoid, but because once you've tasted truth behind the curtain, you can never pretend the show is real again. And that's what they didn't know. That's the secret you carry in your energy. That's the invisible power they feel, but can't articulate. You've died before. And that's exactly why you see what they can't. Number 1, your first death was the collapse of the identity they forced on you. What most people never understood is that the first version of you wasn't actually you. It was a collection of expectations, roles, behaviors, and survival masks you learned just to fit into places that were never built for your spirit. That old identity was stitched together from other people's opinions, family pressures, cultural norms, and silent demands you didn't even know you were trying to meet. You were performing a personality, not living a life. And eventually, your soul got tired of pretending. That collapse, The emotional and spiritual death you went through wasn't poetic at all. It was messy, chaotic, and deeply confusing. It felt like everything that once made sense suddenly dissolved. You were left holding pieces of yourself that no longer matched who you were becoming. People around you saw it as you changing, but the truth is, you were finally stopping the performance, stopping the self-betrayal, stopping the agreement to be small so others could feel comfortable. They had no idea you were grieving the loss of an identity that never belonged to you. When that identity fell apart, it took with it all the illusions you used to depend on. You no longer believed in the relationships held together by guilt. You no longer tolerated conversations that drained your soul. You started noticing the tone behind words, the intention behind smiles, and the weight behind silence. Your spiritual senses sharpened not because you sought enlightenment, but because your spirit finally had space to breathe without the suffocating expectations of others. People think your awakening was a glow-up. They don't know it was a breakdown first. They don't know you cried for the version of you that didn't know better, didn't have boundaries, didn't understand energy, and didn't know how to protect their own peace. They also don't know that when that identity died, the real you stepped forward, quietly, naturally, powerfully. This is why your presence feels different now. You're no longer reacting, reaching, or people-pleasing. You walk with the clarity of someone who lost themselves once and refuses to lose themselves again. The old you died, and that was the greatest liberation your spirit ever experienced. Number 2, your veil lifted because your nervous system broke before it rebuilt. The awakening you experienced didn't happen because you meditated enough or read enough spiritual books. It happened because your body and mind reached a breaking point, a place where nothing could function the way it used to. The nervous system, which normally filters experiences and keeps you safe, couldn't handle the intensity of life anymore. Stress, betrayal, heartbreak, and repeated shocks to your system forced it to collapse. And when it broke, your perception expanded. The veil didn't lift in a calm, mystical moment. It lifted because your system rebuilt itself in a way that could no longer tolerate illusions. When your nervous system rebuilds after being pushed to its limits, it rewires itself to prioritize survival, clarity, and truth over comfort and ignorance. You became hyper-aware. Every gesture, every tone, every half-spoken word started carrying meaning. People noticed it and called it intuition, but it was really just your system compensating for what it went through. You became a human radar. Your body became the instrument, and your soul started reading the signals that everyone else missed. Energy that once passed unnoticed now registers in real time. You feel deception, tension, and hidden agendas before a word is ever spoken. What's fascinating is that this process isn't gentle. It doesn't happen gradually. It's chaotic, exhausting, and sometimes terrifying. But it forces you to see yourself, your environment, and everyone around you with unprecedented clarity. Once your nervous system rebuilt, it refused to return to its old filters. You started recognizing patterns, motives, and intentions that people thought were invisible. You became a walking truth detector. What they call spiritual awareness is really your system saying, I can no longer be fooled, ignored, or manipulated. And that's why your energy now feels different to others. They can't place it, but they sense it. You aren't suspicious or paranoid. You're calibrated. You're operating on a frequency that only comes after surviving breakdowns and rebuilding stronger than before. The veil lifted not because someone waved a magic wand. It lifted because your body, mind, and soul demanded to see clearly, no matter how uncomfortable or unavoidable the truth was. That's why you notice what others miss, and why your presence alone unsettles those who are still operating behind their own filters. Number 3, you didn't just lose people. You lost the version of yourself that tolerated them. When your first death happened, it wasn't only about losing relationships, opportunities, or false illusions. It was about losing a version of yourself, the part that allowed toxic energy in, the part that excused betrayal, the part that silenced your instincts just to keep peace. That version of you was soft, pliable, and designed to fit into the expectations of others, even when it hurt you. And when it died, everything that relied on that compliance and compromise started to fall away. The transformation wasn't subtle, it was disruptive. People around you noticed a change, but they didn't understand it. They might have thought you were acting differently or being too sensitive, but in reality, you were simply refusing to be that version of yourself anymore. That old self, the one who bent, hid, or excused, was gone forever. You couldn't go back to being someone who tolerated chaos or walked on eggshells just to avoid conflict. You had resurrected as a version that could see boundaries clearly, enforce them without guilt, and recognize deception before it could take root. The loss was double-edged. You grieved the version of yourself that could have been used, manipulated, or misunderstood because it was familiar and comforting in its predictability. But at the same time, you celebrated the birth of a self that no one could control, gaslight, or sway. That shift created a ripple effect in your world. Relationships that relied on your old self started breaking. People who had access to you before suddenly found themselves locked out. What they saw as abandonment or coldness was actually liberation and clarity. Your new presence unsettles them because they miss the version of you they could handle. They never realized the old you was fragile enough to be molded, but strong enough to survive. And now, the person standing in your place isn't tolerating their nonsense, isn't apologizing for existing, and isn't negotiating for validation. You lost the version of yourself that allowed them to play games, and in that loss, you gained a power and clarity they'll never comprehend. Number 4. Your awakening wasn't a choice. It was a forced initiation. Your awakening didn't arrive during a peaceful moment or through some guided journey where you voluntarily opened your third eye. You didn't sit down one day and decide you wanted to see the world differently. Life forced it on you. It backed you into a corner so tightly that the only way out was through truth. Raw, uncomfortable, undeniable truth. Everything that once shielded you from reality got stripped away one layer at a time until you had nothing left to cling to but clarity. Pain took the first swing. It shattered illusions you thought were unbreakable. It showed you who people were behind their carefully constructed faces. It exposed the weak spots in your own heart, your own patterns, and your own beliefs. There came a moment where it wasn't about healing or spirituality. It was about survival. Your only choice was to wake up or drown in the weight of everything you didn't want to see. Then rejection came and pulled away the attachments you thought were permanent. The people you leaned on, the ones you trusted, the environments you found comfort in, they all became unstable. The walls you built for safety cracked open, and suddenly you had no one to depend on but yourself. It wasn't personal, it was spiritual pruning. Anything or anyone that wasn't aligned with your higher path had to fall off, even if it hurt. Loneliness played a role too. When everything familiar disappeared, you were left with silence. Not peaceful silence, heavy silence. The kind of silence that forces you to hear your own thoughts, confront your own wounds, and acknowledge truths you once buried. That isolation didn't come to punish you. It came to sharpen you. In that space, you became your own teacher, your own guide, your own protector. People see your insight now and assume you chose a spiritual journey. They think you read your way into wisdom or meditated your way into discernment. They're completely wrong. Your clarity is trauma-forged. It's built from moments that broke you open and rebuilt you with truth as the foundation. You didn't choose awakening. Awakening chose you because your soul was ready, even when your life wasn't. Number 5, you saw death. Because something in you was meant to be born. What you went through wasn't the end of you. It was the uncovering of you. The death you experienced didn't come to destroy your life, your identity, or your future. It came to remove everything that was blocking the deeper, older, wiser part of you from coming forward. It was excavation. Life dug into you, removed layers of conditioning, scraped away false beliefs, and pulled up deeply buried truths you didn't even know you carried. It felt like loss, but it was actually expansion. Every breakdown you faced was life-clearing space for something ancient within you to awaken. You weren't becoming someone new. You were remembering someone old. That's why your senses sharpened. That's why your awareness grew. That's why you started understanding things you were never taught. Your intuition isn't a skill, it's a memory. Your spirit has seen things long before your physical life ever started. And when your old self died, those memories had room to surface. This is why certain situations feel familiar, even when they're new. Why certain people trigger a knowing in you before they speak. Why certain places stir something in your chest. You're not imagining it, you're recalling it. When your veil was removed, it wasn't just a moment of awakening, it was a moment of remembering. The part of you that had been quieted, suppressed, or forgotten finally stepped into the front seat of your life. The version of you that emerged after your death is the version that was always meant to lead. You carry knowledge you didn't study for, and wisdom you didn't earn through age. You didn't just become more intuitive, you became more aligned with the spiritual blueprint you were born with. And the reason it feels so natural is because it is natural. This clarity is your original state. People around you don't realize the truth behind your calmness, your insight, your ability to read between lines. They think you're observant or lucky. They have no idea your soul has been here before, watching, learning, remembering. When life removed everything that suffocated you, it wasn't clearing your path. It was revealing who you were all along. Your death wasn't an ending. It was the birth of your truest self. Number 6, you became dangerous. When you realized you don't fear losing anything anymore. There comes a point in a chosen one's journey where the worst already happened. The heartbreak already hit. The betrayal already cut deep. The disappointment already shattered whatever illusions you had left. You faced an emotional, mental, and spiritual death so heavy that there was nothing left for life to threaten you with. And once you crossed that threshold, something inside you shifted forever. You stopped fearing loss because you had already rebuilt yourself from the kind of emptiness most people run from. When a person reaches that level of inner freedom, they stop negotiating for their worth. They stop trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding them. They stop begging for clarity from people who benefit from confusion. And they definitely stop chasing relationships where they have to shrink just to keep the peace. You became someone who could walk away without hesitating, not because you're cold, but because you learned the cost of holding on to things that break you. This change doesn't go unnoticed. People who once had influence over you feel it immediately. They sense the shift, and it unnerves them. You're no longer moved by the things they used to use against you: fear, guilt, silence, approval, closeness, distance. None of it lands the way it used to. When you've already survived losing yourself, the fear of losing someone else loses its power. And that's what makes you dangerous, not in a harmful way, but in an unshakable way. You don't cling, you don't chase, you don't panic when someone pulls back. You don't crumble when someone exits your life. You've already experienced the deepest loss there is, the loss of your old self. Everything else feels small compared to that. You operate with a calmness that others mistake for detachment, but it's really mastery. You know your worth without needing external validation, and you protect your peace without apologizing for it. People can't manipulate someone who has already survived their lowest point. They can't control someone who knows how to stand alone. Your self-resurrection gave you a strength they can feel but can't figure out. And that's why your presence now carries a power that quietly demands respect. You're no longer afraid of losing anything, because you finally understand that nothing worth keeping requires you to sacrifice yourself. Number 7. You stopped belonging to the world once you saw what controlled it. Once your veil lifted, your vision extended far beyond individual people. You didn't just notice intentions or read emotions, you saw the invisible architecture of life around them. You recognized patterns, routines, and systems that dictated behavior without anyone realizing it. The herd mentality, the societal programming, the subtle ways people unconsciously perpetuate cruelty and ignorance, it all became visible. You realized how much of life is guided by unseen forces and how little freedom most people actually have. That clarity changed everything. The world you belonged to before no longer felt like yours. Places, conversations, and even familiar routines felt constraining because you saw the puppet strings pulling everyone around you. You could no longer engage with life superficially because the illusions that used to comfort others now felt suffocating. You could hear the background noise of influence, control, and hidden agendas, and that constant awareness kept you at a distance. You stopped participating in life as it was presented to you and started navigating it on your own terms. This separation isn't loneliness, it's alignment. You don't belong to the world not because you reject people, but because you refuse to be guided by systems designed to keep you small, distracted, or unaware. You walk through life seeing both the actors and the directors behind the scenes. You notice the costs of compliance, the dangers of blind trust, and the toll of staying asleep. That knowledge changed your choices, your relationships, and even how you interact with yourself. People notice the difference in you, even if they can't articulate it. They sense a dissonance between your energy and theirs, a subtle resistance to the currents they swim in effortlessly. They feel it because you operate on a plane they haven't reached, a plane where awareness precedes action and truth precedes comfort. You stopped belonging to the world because you saw too much, understood too much, and refused to pretend ignorance anymore. The veil didn't just lift, it relocated you into a realm of clarity that is yours alone, and there's no going back. Number 8. Your spirit never fully returned to normal life after your awakening. After your awakening, life didn't snap back into place the way people expected. You didn't return to who you were before, and you couldn't even if you tried. A part of you resurrected, stronger, wiser, more anchored, but another part remained behind the veil. That part didn't come back with your body. It stayed in the realm where truth is louder, energy is clearer, and motives are visible long before they're spoken. This is why you often feel like you're in two worlds at once. You're physically present, but spiritually elevated, observing life from a vantage point most people don't have access to. This dual awareness isn't a flaw or a mental struggle. It's a side effect of seeing too much. You're aware of the physical conversations happening in front of you, but you're also aware of the energetic ones happening underneath. You notice the tone behind a compliment, the tension behind a smile, and the hesitation behind a decision. Your spirit scans the room before your mind even processes the details. It's not dissociation, it's refinement. Your senses operate on two frequencies, and you've learned to exist between them. This is why you sometimes feel disconnected from what others consider normal life. Small talk drains you. Forced social settings feel unnatural. People's emotional chaos feels amplified. You're not uninterested. You're just tuned into a different layer of reality. A world where spiritual truths matter more than social rules, where you follow energy instead of appearances, and where you see the bigger picture, even when others get lost in the surface-level storyline. People misunderstand this about you. They think you're distant, cold, or hard to read. They assume you're disinterested or detached. What they don't know is that you're simply processing life with twice the input. They sense something different in you, a quiet intensity, a calm depth, a presence that feels both grounded and otherworldly. It unsettles some and inspires others, but most can't explain it. The truth is, you didn't return to normal life because you weren't meant to. Your awakening shifted your spirit permanently. You walk with knowledge your old self never carried. You see layers others don't see. You feel realities others aren't tuned into. Part of you lives here, and part of you lives beyond. And that duality is exactly what makes you who you are now. Awake, aware, and impossible to mislead. Number 9. You outgrew emotional gravity. And they hate that you no longer orbit their chaos. What happened to you wasn't a small shift. It was a full-blown emotional death and resurrection, and most people will never understand the mechanics of that transformation. When you died internally, an entire ecosystem of reactions, fears, triggers, and emotional dependencies died with you. You stopped being held down by the gravitational pull of chaos, because the version of you that used to respond to chaos no longer exists. People who once controlled you through guilt, confusion, emotional traps, and psychological warfare can no longer access the portals they used to use. The buttons they used to press are now disconnected. The levers they used to pull are now rusted. The entire control panel they depended on has been spiritually decommissioned. Your old emotional programming, people-pleasing, over-explaining, trying to be understood, absorbing other people's mess, collapsed. And when that system collapsed, you became weightless to negativity. That's why drama feels childish now. Not because you're mature, but because you've already walked through realities that broke you open and forced you to rebuild yourself without illusions. People who still operate in survival mode, who need dysfunction, who need attention, who need emotional reactions, can't stand the fact that you no longer respond like a puppet attached to their strings. You see straight through manipulation now because the darkness you survived taught you patterns, not just feelings. You learned to recognize the architecture of a storm, not just the sound of thunder. So when someone tries to bait you, guilt-trip you, or destabilize you, you don't react, you observe. And that observation alone threatens them, because your survival removed the gravitational pull they once relied on. You're not anchored to their dysfunction, you're not orbiting their emotional state, you're not entangled in their psychological cycles. You outgrew emotional gravity. Your mind is now calibrated for clarity. Your spirit is calibrated for peace. Your intuition is calibrated for truth. And anyone who still lives in emotional chaos will always feel like they're screaming into the void when they try to reach you, because you don't get pulled into storms anymore. You've already survived a hurricane, and once you've rebuilt your soul from the rubble, you don't fear weather, you read it. Number 10. You carry knowledge that is not learned, it's recalled. The wisdom you carry isn't a result of books, lectures, or years of study. It's the consequence of remembering who you were before society told you who to be. When your old self died, it wasn't just an emotional death. It was an identity wipe, a spiritual hard reset that cleared the noise and exposed what was already encoded inside you. Your higher self didn't arrive, it emerged. This is why your insight confuses people. They keep trying to rationalize the fact that you understand things you were never taught. They accuse you of acting too deep or thinking too much. But what they're really reacting to is the uncomfortable reality that your intelligence is internal, not acquired. It didn't come from their systems, their validations, or their hierarchies, so they don't know what to do with it. You operate from a place that feels supernatural to people who rely on external sources for understanding. They learn from repetition. You learn from recognition. They gather information. You awaken it. They study patterns. You remember truths that their minds have never touched. That's why situations that confuse others are clear to you within seconds. That's why you sense intentions before words are spoken. That's why you decode people without needing evidence. That's why you walk into rooms already knowing the emotional weather. You're not analyzing, you're recalling. Your spirit has lived through lifetimes of trials, lessons, contracts, betrayals, and initiations. Every time a version of you dies, another layer of memory resurfaces, memory that never belonged to your intellect, but to your essence. This is the knowing people can't explain about you. It's the reason your wisdom feels ancient, yet vividly present. Your insight is not the product of education. It's the return of information your soul stored long before your mind existed. And this terrifies people, because they can't manipulate someone who sees the trap before it's set. They can't deceive someone who remembers the truth under the lie. They can't out-strategize someone who's already lived this pattern in another form. Your knowledge disturbs them because it exposes them. You are a modern body carrying ancient consciousness, and every time you speak, you break the illusion that wisdom must come from institutions. You don't learn the world, you remember it. And that remembrance is exactly what makes you untouchable. Number 11, you see motives before people even speak. The veil didn't just lift to give you awareness, it expanded your vision into dimensions most people can't even perceive. After your death and resurrection, your perception stretched beyond words, gestures, or appearances. You stopped only hearing what was said and started sensing what was intended. Energy became language, and behavior became a map of hidden agendas. Every nuance, hesitation, and micro-expression became readable, like a story unfolding in real time. This isn't intuition the way people think of it. It isn't a guess or a gut feeling. It's accuracy born from survival. You've walked through scenarios that would have broken your old self, seen the betrayal before it landed, and endured the deception without being consumed by it. That history trained your senses to detect patterns of dishonesty, manipulation, and hidden motives. You don't need someone to confess or act out their plan. Their intent is already visible in the energy they radiate. It's disorienting to others because they expect you to operate on the same level they do. They assume words mask truth, smiles hide intention, and lies can pass unnoticed. But you live in a realm where nothing is hidden. Lies, half-truths, concealed agendas, they all register instantly. That's why they feel exposed around you. They can't manipulate, lie, or strategize without you seeing it before it's executed. What they interpret as reading minds or overanalyzing is really just a recalibrated vision, spiritual night vision forged from surviving what most people fear to confront. This heightened perception doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you prepared. Danger, deceit, and manipulation are no longer surprises. They are signals to navigate, not traps to fall into. You observe, measure, and act with precision, and that calm, unshakable awareness unsettles those still operating in darkness. They sense that nothing they do can catch you off guard, and that unspoken truth rattles them more than any confrontation ever could. You don't just see people, you see through them, and that clarity is both your shield and your power. Because when you've died and returned with a vision that pierces intention itself, there is no place left for deception to hide. Number 12. The old version of you was the one they could manipulate, not this one. The version of yourself they knew was soft enough to bend, pliable enough to negotiate with, and blind enough to tolerate behavior that no one should ever tolerate. That old self carried their expectations, their agendas, and their control like it was a burden you were trained to bear. They could push you, pull you, and shape you because you hadn't yet discovered your own power. Every boundary you lacked, every compromise you made, every silence you swallowed, those were openings they exploited without a second thought. Then, the old version of you died. And with that death, everything that made you malleable and accessible vanished. What rose in its place wasn't a version molded by anger or revenge. It was a resurrected you who understood your worth, enforced your boundaries, and operated from a spiritual clarity they couldn't touch. You became unpredictable in the best way. Your decisions are no longer reactive. Your energy can't be hijacked, and your presence alone communicates that manipulation will no longer work. They feel shocked, not because you changed suddenly, they expected some growth, but because they finally realize that you won't go back. The version of you that could be controlled is permanently gone, and nothing they do can reconstruct it. That creates discomfort, frustration, and, in some cases, desperation. They remember the version they could handle and assumed you would always be accessible, always tolerable, always negotiable. But you've closed that chapter permanently. This transformation doesn't require explanation or proof. It's silent, unshakable, and profoundly visible in the way you carry yourself. People notice it immediately, even if they can't articulate it. Every attempt to manipulate, guilt-trip, or control you now falls flat, because the architecture that allowed it no longer exists. The resurrected you is not angry, you're aligned. You're not defensive, you're sovereign. You don't need to prove your power, they feel it in your energy. And that realization terrifies them more than any confrontation ever could. They aren't shocked by your change. They're shocked by the fact that the old version of you is gone forever. Number 13. Your resurrection triggered their confusion, because they expected you to stay broken. When you fell, they didn't see it as a chapter. They saw it as your ending. They genuinely believed that moment of collapse would define the rest of your life. In their minds, your breakdown was permanent. Your silence was defeat. And your disappearance was proof that you'd been destroyed. They were comfortable with the idea of you staying down because it made their own choices look justified, their behavior look excusable, and their doubts about you look accurate. But resurrection has a way of insulting small minds. You didn't just get back up. You resurfaced with a clarity and power that made your former version look like a shadow. You came back steadier, more discerning, more grounded, and spiritually fortified in ways they never saw coming. They expected you to return, trembling, needy, dependent on the same people who hurt you. Instead, you returned with a self-possession that exposed their miscalculations. Your comeback disrupted their entire storyline. They had mentally written you off, rehearsed their superiority, and settled into the comfort of believing they'd won. So when you rose, quietly, gracefully, with no announcement, they felt something they never prepared for: confusion mixed with embarrassment. Your rebirth forced them to face the fact that they misunderstood who you truly were from the beginning. Your resurrection didn't just surprise them, it threatened them. Because now they had to acknowledge that the pain they expected to destroy you actually sculpted you, that the isolation they thought would break you ended up awakening you, that the loss they celebrated became the very thing that sharpened your spiritual edge. They never imagined that you'd use the ashes as elevation. They didn't consider that your downfall was a spiritual initiation, not a collapse. And what unsettles them most is the realization that you rose without their help, their validation, or their approval. You rose because you were meant to. Your rebirth humbles every person who secretly hoped your story would end at your lowest point. They weren't ready for the version of you that stands before them now, unbroken, unreadable, and undeniably reborn. Number 14. Your death turned you into the version of yourself your destiny always required. The person you used to be wasn't weak. They were simply unprepared for the magnitude of the destiny tied to your name. Your old identity had habits, attachments, fears, and blind spots that could never survive the pathway ahead. So life, in its ruthless grace, removed that version of you the only way it could, through a kind of death. Not physical death, but the collapse of everything that kept you small, unawakened, and distracted. Who you were before was incompatible with where you're going. Your original self was built for survival, not purpose. That version of you was shaped by expectations, shaped by environment, shaped by the people you loved and trusted, but not shaped by destiny. And destiny has a way of stripping away anything that slows it down. You didn't volunteer for that transformation. It was demanded of you. You didn't decide to awaken. You were pushed into it because remaining blind would have cost too much. Your veil didn't lift for aesthetics or enlightenment vibes. It lifted because you needed raw clarity to fulfill what you were sent here to do. You were never meant to walk through life, guessing people's intentions, tolerating the wrong alliances, or stumbling in circles. You were meant to move with intention, discernment, and spiritual intelligence. You were meant to see the traps before you stepped into them, the motives before they were spoken, the lessons before they arrived. This death and resurrection changed your internal architecture. Your thinking expanded. Your emotional responses matured. Your spirit recalibrated itself to operate on a frequency aligned with your higher purpose. The pain wasn't random. It was construction. The loss wasn't punishment. It was preparation. You became the version of yourself that your destiny always needed. The self that doesn't hesitate, doesn't misread, doesn't settle, and doesn't wander blindly. You became the self that sees clearly, walks boldly, and carries knowledge that didn't come from books or conversations, but from experience etched into your soul. And this new version of you isn't an upgrade. It's the original blueprint, finally activated. Conclusion: the chosen one who has already died and returned. What you've survived is not ordinary. It is not something that can be explained with simple phrases or brushed off as growth. Every collapse, every betrayal, every moment that shattered your old self was a deliberate recalibration. You didn't merely endure, you died, excavated and resurrected as the version of yourself your destiny demanded. Each death stripped away illusions, attachments, and limitations, leaving behind a clarity so precise that the world can feel it radiating from you even before you speak. You carry knowledge that isn't learned. It is remembered, encoded deep in your spirit, long before your current life began. You see motives before words are spoken, energy before it manifests, and truth before it is disguised. You are no longer tethered to emotional gravity. Chaos, manipulation, and drama slip past you like water off armor. The old version of yourself, the one they thought they could control, no longer exists. You walk with sovereignty, calm, and an unshakable inner authority that terrifies those who once assumed your weakness. Your resurrection doesn't just defy expectations. It breaks the narrative of anyone who ever thought they could predict, harm, or contain you. Your veil lifted not for aesthetics or curiosity, but because your purpose demanded it. You now navigate life with a vision that transcends the ordinary, seeing layers, truths, and possibilities that the unawakened can't even fathom. You are a walking reminder that surviving the worst versions of life is the ultimate initiation, and that initiation forged a power, wisdom, and resilience that is both timeless and unstoppable. Every step you take now is guided by truth. Every choice you make is filtered through clarity, discernment, and spiritual intelligence. You are untouchable, not because you seek perfection, but because you embody reality in its purest form. And the world, whether it knows it or not, is forever shifted by your presence. If this message resonates, if it lights something deep inside you, make sure to subscribe to the channel to stay connected to these truths. Like this video if it shook your perception, share it with others who are ready to awaken, and comment below with your insights or experiences, because your story and your awakening deserve to be honored, celebrated, and amplified. This is your time, chosen one, and the world will never see life the same way again after you. God bless you.